Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome to a Saturday. Welcome to us talking more about the Renaissance. First of all, real quick shout out to everybody that has done their artwork presentations so far. Really impressed by the Last Supper one by Julia and Courtney Stahl. Really impressed by the Pieta so far by Jenna Hasselback, right? I love the fact that y'all are showing me how much research you've done, that you know these artworks, and that you're willing to teach them to your classmates. Love it. You guys are killing it. Keep up the good work. Absolutely a big fan. Now, getting into the class content stuff, though, okay? Now, yes, you are right. We aren't going to get as much time to review this stuff as much as we would like. But look, next week, I don't have open house stuff anymore. So if y'all want to start coming during S period over the next couple of days so we can take the time to review the stuff that we're not reviewing in class due to the fact that we have the presentations, it's completely fine, all right? I'm posting that study guide today, so then you can actually go over these things. But where we left off, because I don't want to get this any longer than 25 minutes, and we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got to wrap up the Renaissance. We've got to move into the Reformation, right? So let's get after it, right? Now, we left off talking about the printing revolution, right? We talked about Johannes Gutenberg making a metal type printing press, types being those little like tiles of letters, right? Almost like a Scrabble tile. Using that device to spread intelligence. Literacy is going up. Books are becoming cheaper. All that good stuff, right? Typing, right? I told you that whole thing. And then the uppercase, lowercase, which everybody thinks is dorky, but I find super interesting, and I don't know why. But the big thing about it is the printing press is going to forever change the way the Renaissance spreads, all right? The printing press is the thing that gives the ability for the Reformation to happen. Gives the ability for the Renaissance to spread further and go northward, which we'll talk about here in a second as well. So one big example, though, of the spread of information from the Renaissance is going to continue to be those writings, right? Like when we talked about Saint Thomas Aquinas, Dante Alighieri, and Petrarch, all of their stuff was handwritten, right? All of that stuff's handwritten, which means that it spread very slowly. But the second the printing press comes along, people like this guy and his ideas spread much faster, right? And this guy's name is Baldassare Castiglione, right? So Baldassare Castiglione with this very famous self-portrait, which if I could grow a beard like that, you best believe I would rock one. Those things are dope. That is like if Mr. Stein was like a Renaissance thinker, right? Like, I mean, look at that bad boy, right? So now, big thing though, going forward, that's this big sweater that you always wear right here. I really shouldn't be saying this on video, but whatever. At this point, I can't help it. Now look, but the big thing is Baldassare Castiglione, though, much like a lot of the educators at our school, is going to be a very prominent guide through the Renaissance, right? Because his book, known as the Courtier, is going to become a guide to behavior in the Renaissance, right? And we need 2 bullet points underneath this bad boy, right? I know these things frustrate some of y'all sometimes when you're like, what do I have to do? Just be quiet, just write it down, all right? So now look, so one of them is what a courtier is, right? So you could have like a little arrow that goes down here real quick. Let's say what a courtier is, because you don't know what a courtier is, it doesn't make any sense as a title, right? So what a courtier is an advisor to a king, right? So kings during this time period had these things known as courts, right? Or court life. And that is basically like having a big party every single night and having advisors that you trust a lot, right? And a courtier is one of those advisors, right? They're usually a noble, they're well-educated, they're smart, they can read, they can write, they can usually do multiple things, and they have proven themselves to be highly intelligent. That is what a courtier is. So in Baldassare Castiglione's book, he's writing to how to be like those guys. How do we be more like courtiers? How do we make every man his own courtier? We do that by showing people how to act, right? How to act during the Renaissance. Don't be Middle Ages like. Know how to do a lot of different stuff, right? We'll get to that here in a second. Just hold on to that fact, right? And then the second bullet point is this book becomes the guide to education throughout the Renaissance, right? Noble and wealthy families begin to adopt this text, and then they start to use this text as a form of, what do I teach my children? How do I figure this out? It's kind of like the first curriculum for the Renaissance, right? I use curriculum to know exactly what I'm going to be talking about in the Renaissance era. His book becomes that curriculum, right? And so in his mind, he believed that the ideal man during the Renaissance was like an athletic guy who's not overactive, right? You can physically compete, but you're not doing too much, right? A guy that's good at games, but he's not a gambler, right? He's good, he's competitive, he's smart, he knows strategy, right? Like I love to play chess. If any of y'all want to go in chess at any point, bring it. All right, so I have a set in my classroom, actually. And then second of all, Queen's Gambit, watch that. Very, very big female empowerment role in that one. But the big thing is, though, I'm good at games, but I don't gamble on them, right? Because I don't want to get arrogant. I don't want to get too much. I don't want to be cocky. Plays a musical instrument. Knows history. A lot of this stuff is just starting to sound like Mr. Terry. I guess I'm an ideal Renaissance man, I guess, according to Castiglione. Because some of you are like, what instrument can you play? I can play a mean recorder, all right? So hot cross buns all day long. Now, big thing, though, going into it also, knows literature, but I guess I'm not a Renaissance man because you're also not supposed to be arrogant. My bad. All right, so now the ideal women, according to Castiglione, is graceful, kind, lively, reserved, beautiful, and offers balance to a man. So we know that he's still kind of a sexist, all right? So a big thing about it is this was not as applicable to women because, of course, it's still the Renaissance, still the early 1500s, and it's still guys in history pre-1900. So, like, you understand what I'm saying? It's not as, like as useful to women, but it is a very important book, right? Now, this guy, though, make a star, circle it. His whole section is very important. He is arguably the most important writer from the Renaissance period, okay? He is going to pop up in your European history class for the rest of your life. He's going to pop up in every history class for the rest of your life. He's going to pop up in regular, idle, everyday conversation. I'm not kidding. Everybody who is smart or knows a thing about a thing knows who this guy is, right? This is Niccolo Machiavelli. Not Machiavelli. If I hear you say Machiavelli, I'm going to think you muted it. All right? So now, Machiavelli. And he is going to write a very famous book known as The Prince, right? And in The Prince, he begins to ask the question, what makes the best ruler, right? This slide right here is awful. For some of you that didn't even write it down, I'm proud of you, whatever, but it's okay. We're going to add some stuff to it real quick here, okay? Now, The Prince is going to explore how governments should rule, right? What is the best type of ruler? Does the end justify the means, right? Things like that. That's a very famous quote from his book, The Prince, okay? But here's the bigger thing. He asks the question, is it better to be feared or loved? Is it better to be feared or loved? If I was a ruler, do I want my people to fear me or do I want them to love me, right? This is a very important question that Niccolo Machiavelli poses. And this guy was doing most of his writing when the Medicis were exiled outside of... Oh, actually, that's not true. He did most of his writing when he was exiled by the Medici, right? He was tortured and stuff. He followed up this priest named Savonarola who got burnt alive in a big square. I can tell you all about it later on. But the big thing, though, is that question, right? That question. Is it better to be feared or loved? And I'm sure a lot of you are like, I think feared makes sense because you don't want somebody who's going to be a pushover. And then some of you are like, I think loves probably makes sense because you want people to rally and support you, right? This was his justification. Jot this down. Very important quote. He actually said, it is better to be feared rather than loved, comma, but he shouldn't be hated. Now look, that second half of the quote is phenomenally important, right? You will live the rest of your life going to coffee houses or having political discussion with people, and they'll be like, Machiavelli is so mean. The president's such a Machiavellian leader. That is where I give you the permission to slap that person in the face and say, he was trying to be ironic. All right, so you just freak out, okay? Because he's saying the fear should not be fear of his own citizens. It should be the other citizens of other countries being afraid of him because he's willing to go to any length for his people. He's willing to go to war for his people. He's willing to kill for his people. It's not like he's willing to kill his own people, right? That's the irony in the entire situation. That's why, but he ought not be hated is so important, right? It is better to be feared than loved, but he ought not be hated. No one ever finishes the quote. I've had college professors before who were like, it's better to be feared than loved. Machiavelli's such a jerk. That's not, you got to read the entire thing. Actually, the book, The Prince, actually still reads pretty well. It's not that big. It's kind of like a little novel. And a lot of it he's trying to set up like a dramatic irony, being like, a leader needs to be just to his own, but he doesn't care how he is to others, right? So, and that's what makes a good leader for his own people. So Machiavelli, very important. But then what we're going to see happen out of nowhere is the Renaissance is going to start spreading northward, right? So this was really important. We talked about this very, very loosely at the very beginning of this unit, right? We talked about like a little quid pro quo kind of stuff. We were like, oh, there's Italian and there's Northern artists, right? Well, let's talk about it a little bit more specific now. When I say the Renaissance is going to spread north, what I mean by that is the Renaissance is going to spread north due to several factors, right? Trade, the printing press, the new economies that are beginning to like be birthed themselves in European history, right? You're going to see the movement of ideas. What is this? Cultural diffusion, right? Like it's happening, right? It's happening in front of our face. It is spreading northward through cultural diffusion, right? So with that, you're going to see artists who are persecuted for their works run to the north. Big, important countries that include these places are England, France. Don't write Germany, all right? So Germany doesn't exist yet. It's the Holy Roman Empire, right? So you say England, France, the Holy Roman Empire. There's a couple other ones you could throw in there. You could throw Spain in there. You could throw the Dutch Republic in there, even though it doesn't actually exist yet. But I'm just saying the Netherlands is a general area because the Flemish people make a lot of stuff. Jan van Eyck, good job, Brooke Murray. He's Flemish, so you could be considered like Dutch and or North French, right? So like England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire do tend to be very important places when we are talking about this northward spread of the Renaissance, right? So oh wait, what? That you've seen that already. Speaking of that though, let's talk about what Northern artists do a little bit different, right? So Northern artists are very different because, and we just changed gears, right? We talked about architecture at one point, talked about what art has changed, talked about humanism, talked about writings, different stuff like that. Those two writers we just talked about, you could call civic humanists. Remember, you need to know what the word humanist is. Like if you walk in to class the day of the test and just humanism is written on your forehead, I'll be very impressed. All right, so now, but the Northern artists are going to depict different things, right? Look at Brooke Murray's example of the Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck, right? So the thing about it is they represent everyone, regular people, right? Northern artists typically will depict wealthy people, poor people, peasants, thinkers, famous people, but they're humans that exist here. It's not as often as you see a Northern artist depict religious scenes, but they do that as well, okay? do. Now, anyway, but yeah, that right there, that is a Northern artist. That is Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait, right? Here's another example you could look at. This one is The Descent from the Cross by Jan van Eyck, right? So very famous piece of his. It actually does depict a Christ coming down from the cross and a fainting Mary by his side, but it's meant to be more humanistic, right? And the detail in this thing is absolutely ridiculous. Jot that down. High, immense detail, right? Immense detail. Also, for Northern artists, a little bit more use of darker colors, right? Darker shading, darker backgrounds, darker colors are used within it, right? And you'll be able to tell the difference between it when we show some Italian arts and some Northern arts as well, right? So now look, that right there, look at the detail of that skull. Also, little hidden symbolism in the Descent from the Cross. This thing was made for a crossbowmen's guild, right? A guild of men that made crossbows and sold them, right? Guilds being that big sign of economic resurgence in European history. You can actually see the symbolism of the crossbowmen's guild because Mary and Christ's arms are in the shape of a bow, like you would use like a bow and arrow, right? Like a crossbow. They're actually shaped like crossbows. So like that was who it was made for. And using that immense type of detail, artists like Jan van Eyck are going to really change the game and actually bring in a lot of new perspectives when it comes to art, right? So, and especially when it comes to Northern art, right? Like look at the detail in Jan van Eyck's hat right there. Look at all this stuff. Look at Albrecht Dürer right there. There's a lot of very intense things going on with Northern artists. They depict everyone, real people, poor people, immense people, wealthy people, lots of detail, a lot of the bit of use of dark colors. You'll be able to spot them though, I promise, from here on out. Now, the next thing we're getting into though is we've just got a second to think about this, right? We got to take 2 seconds. Sorry, I'm skipping a lot of pictures. I don't use them anymore. But that's right. The Renaissance, to give that whole thing a better understanding. The Renaissance is going to directly cause the Reformation. You guys have already learned so much about the Reformation. And for that, I do have to thank our guy, Mr. Mathern, for every great thing he has done when it comes to teaching you in such great detail about that particular time. Like, just look at this guy. Such a good guy, right? Like, just amazing, magical. Look at him go. Gavin Mathern, thank you for teaching about the Reformation, because I don't have to worry about hanging on every single little thing as much anymore, right? So the big thing about the Reformation, though, now we're going to change gears a little bit. We're going to go into the Reformation. We, though, are going to look at this from much more of a political stance, right? We're going to look at it from the political end of things, kind of talk a little bit more about how it gets a little bit more intense at certain times, how it gets a little bit more about politics, and how a lot of it has to do with like taxation, things like that. But the big thing we got to understand going into the Reformation is people are going to begin to use humanist ideas to question a very central force in their life, right? And that central force in their life that they are going to begin to question is the church, okay? Humanism brings on the questioning. It questions secular ideas. It questions everything. But here's a really important thing to understand. And yes, I'm throwing this out there to Mr. Mathern as a yes, we all understand this here now. The humanists weren't really questioning the faith. They were questioning the people running it. All right. So like now some humanists are going to question the faith structure in and of a totality in itself, Martin Luther being one of them. But a lot of our early reformers are actually questioning the people who are in charge of the faith, not the faith itself. Right. And so just so you can have a good definition, understanding how this humanism, how the Renaissance is going to lead to the Reformation, and how basically you could say that the Reformation is within the Renaissance. And some historians argue that the Renaissance never actually ended. The Protestant Reformation is a movement that split the church in Western Europe, which at the time was the Holy Roman Catholic Church, right? Into Western Europe, into the establishment of a number of new churches, right? So the Protestant Reformation is going to give us two types of Christianity: Catholicism and Protestantism, right? And there are tons of different types of Protestants, right? There are a couple of different types of Catholics too, but we're not going to get into that right now. But like bunches of Protestants, and then you're still going to have your Catholic Church, right? The Reformation is going to lead to the birth of those things. I myself was raised as a Protestant, right? I was raised as a Baptist in North Carolina, which is a very, very heavy Protestant state, right? So now moving forward though, okay? Moving forward, we're gonna hustle, right? We're hustling. Don't write that. That's garbage. All right, so like anyway, now here we go, okay? So the Renaissance is going to lead directly to the Reformation due to the fact that there is going to be quite a bit of church corruption, right? We are going to now take a moment to discuss how the church and the way it was being run in the Middle Ages going out of the Renaissance is going to be pretty corrupt and is going to cause the Reformation, right? You talked about a couple of these things in Mr. Mathern's class. We're going to go a little bit more in depth with them, right? Now, really quick disclaimer. I am not saying that there is anything wrong with Catholicism, all right? I have to put this out there because people misconstrue what I'm saying. Legally speaking, I am not saying that there is anything wrong with the Catholic faith itself. I'm just saying that during the Middle Ages, the people that were running it were a little messed up, right? So, and to name a few of those messed up situations, one of the biggest ones we have is this problem with papal supremacy, right? The problem of papal supremacy happens to do with the fact, or happens to revolve around the fact, that bad popes are starting to be very corrupt, right? Oftentimes, they're starting to operate much more like monarchs, much more like kings, much more like big tyrants that are doing things like waging war, levying taxes, leading very lavish lifestyles, and spending money on themselves, right? Instead of reinvesting the money of the tithe back into the church community and helping their parishioners with it, right? And there are two really good examples I can show you of this, right? Now, papal supremacy and political inquiry is going to be a big problem. This right here is known as the Cadaver Synod from 897, right? So the Cadaver Synod was an actual trial that was held by Pope Stephen VI against this guy, Pope Formosus. Some of you are like, wait a minute, there's two popes? One's accusing the other one and putting the other one on trial? Yeah, so see, what had happened is Pope Stephen VI right here put Pope Formosus on trial. Pope Formosus had been dead for 7 months, all right? Pope Stephen VI had Pope Formosus' body dug up out of the ground, put into a chair. It was sitting there decomposed and stuff with skin falling off of it, and he was accusing him of crimes against the papacy, calling him a heretic, saying that he was unjust, saying that he was corrupt, and ironically enough, the people of Europe loved Pope Formosus, right? But Stephen VI says, I still believe that you have done these things that are wrong, and some of you are probably thinking to yourself, well, isn't it going to be kind of a boring trial if it's just some really, really wrapped up guy yelling at a dead body? Well, no, because Pope Stephen made a small Italian deacon go behind the chair and then, like, talk for the body. Be like,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it.
And then, like, literally, this dead body was speaking. He then had the Pope Formosus's 3 blessing fingers cut off, these 3 right here, cut off of his body, and then had the Pope, like, buried in a prisoner's, like, grave site, and then had the Pope dug up and then hucked into the Tiber River, right? So that's an example of kind of just, like, political ridiculousness going on during this time period, okay? Also, Julius II, the Pope from 1503 to 1513, known as the Warrior Pope, literally formed an army and invaded Italy at least 3 separate times. And he also bought his papal reign. Julius II is the guy that paid for the Sistine Madonna, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the School of Athens, the blah, 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 like all kinds of other stuff, right? His own, like, tomb that was built by Michelangelo, right? Really intense stuff happening here, right? Julius II is a jerk. He also died from syphilis, which I don't really want to get into that right now, but that's not what popes should be dying from, all right? So, also, Inquisition, torture, and execution, right? The Spanish Inquisition is one of the best examples of this. We will talk about that in a later unit to kind of discuss growing monarchical power during the Renaissance. But the Inquisition was that church court that put people on trial for their crimes. An Inquisition, now not the Inquisition, because they all kind of operated independently, but a Catholic British Inquisition is the person responsible for burning our girl Joan of Arc at the stake, right? This idea of putting people on trial and then deeming them to be executed by church law is a big problem, right? So, like, that's a big issue. That is not the venue that the church should be actually being involved in. Now, some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, didn't all the, like, law systems and law codes of Rome fall with Rome? Yes, that is true. So the church was like the de facto lawmakers and judiciary body at the time, but still, it's really messed up. Like, if you're executing one person and you're the ruling holy body, that's still a problem. Pope Francis himself has apologized for the Inquisition, so don't tell me that it's not that bad, right? So now, also another big one, the Great Western Schism, also known as the Avignon Papacy, right? The Avignon Papacy and the Great Western Schism, literally, I kid you not, from 1378 to 1417, there were multiple popes, all right? So what ended up happening is that there was a pope in France and a pope in Italy. And at one point, by the end, there was a pope in the Holy Roman Empire. There were 3 of them at the exact same time. And different countries would actually pick which pope they liked the best, right? This is extremely corrupt. This is really messed up. And I could talk about the Great Western Schism for days. Now, this is a really big one as well. What book is this writing from? Good job, Shayla Woodward. I heard you right there. That is from Dante's Inferno, right? This is from the Divine Comedy. That is Dante right there with Virgil in his book where he claimed in one of the lower levels of hell, he saw some people being punished the worst he'd ever been seen, right? And they were inside of cauldrons, upside down, burning alive with only their feet exposed when demons would come up and poke their bare feet. What sin could these people have possibly done to deserve that for all of eternity? Oh, I don't know. Simony, which is a big one you already know from Mr. Mathern's class, right? The buying and selling of church offices. So even Dante recognized church corruption over 150 years before Martin Luther ever actually wrote the 95 Theses, right? Then we got nepotism, which is like favoritism towards families, which we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Pope Leo X is the best example of that. And here's a big one as well, pluralism. Pluralism is the holding of multiple church offices at the same time and collecting all of their salaries, right? These are just really big examples of Catholic Church corruption going into the Reformation. Now, again, disclaimer, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Catholic faith. Got it? All right, so now moving forward. Are we going to have some early reformers? Yes, we are. Now, we only have a couple more minutes, and then we're going to be done, okay? So 3 more slides. 3 more slides. No, wait, 2 more slides. Y'all got this. 2 more slides, okay? Let's get after it. So there are some early reformers, right? To try and sit there and say that Martin Luther was the only reformer ever is ridiculous, right? We don't believe that. That's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. Also, it would be kind of a downfall because Martin Luther got a little nuts towards the latter half of his life. Very, very nervous about going to hell. Now, anyway, but the big one that came first, right, is a guy named Desiderius Erasmus, right? Desiderius Erasmus is a Flemish writer, okay, another Flemish guy, right? So we believe he's like French-Dutch, right? So He's the father of this concept that you would call Christian humanism, right? So he took the ideas of the Renaissance and he blended them with Christianity, right? And he was a part of this giant thing called a Republic of Letters, where he would send letters back and forth to other religious thinkers, and they'd be like, isn't this messed up what Pope Julius is doing? Isn't this messed up what the church is doing? Isn't this messed up? And this has been going on for several hundred years, right? So Christian humanism states that also he believed that the Catholic faith had gone down a bad path because they were turning Christianity not into a guide to life, but a checklist to get into heaven, right? Okay, I've done this sacrament, I've done this sacrament, I've done this sacrament. And he rebelled against that, right? He was like, that doesn't make any sense. He also advocated for vernacular Bibles, right? Which is, of course, Bibles that human beings can read because there are multiple spoken languages, right? So he translated the Bible into Greek, I guess. Thanks. All right, but he translated it into Greek because it was a language that he knew and understand how to do. Plus, Greek wasn't commonly read, colloquially speaking, at the time, so he wouldn't get into too much trouble for it, right? Now, exposed Catholic Church corruption in also many of his works. He made fun of Julius II repeatedly. In his book called The Praise of Folly, he claims that Julius II will not get into heaven, right? This guy is bold. Desiderius Erasmus, excuse me, in his Praise of Folly said, Julius II, you're not going to hell, but you're not getting into heaven. You will be standing outside the gates with a list of the things you've done wrong. That's a really intense statement, right? That's a really intense moment. But it's important to know that he never stopped being Catholic, okay? He never desired to create a new faith. He just desired to expose the corruption that was going on, right? And you got a lot of guys like that. This one, very, very famous English priest by the name of John Wycliffe, right? Who operated in the 1400s. He believed that the church should give up all of its earthly possessions, right? He's like, you know what? The church has got too much money. It's got too much stuff. It's way more concerned about paintings and oncoming. Well, he wasn't actually even alive during the visual part of the Renaissance. He was alive during the early part. He was like, but they got way too much stuff. The Vatican is huge. It's full of gold and all this other shenanigans. We should give that all away, and then we should commit to helping the people instead. And then he dies, and then the church discovers his writings after the fact, and then they excommunicate him after he's dead. All right, so, and then another guy, big thing, speaking of, after he was dead, his body was then dug up and burned out of spite and then put into a cemetery for prisoners and thieves. All right, so like that is a really, really big no-no as well, because it's like, really, church, you're that mad about somebody having a different idea? Like, calm down. So John Wycliffe's a big one. English priest said, just give all the stuff back, man. And then he gets his dead body burned and then stuck into a poor person's cemetery. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Now, this one's the most famous one, though, okay? This is not Jan, Jan Hus. All right, Jan Hus is a Bohemian, which means he's from the modern-day Czech Republic, okay? He would speak Czech, okay? So now, Czech is in the former Czechoslovakia, right? So he is Bohemian, and he is the first really big reformer, right? He's the first one to get big before Martin Luther got big, right? But the problem with Jan Hus is the fact that he came before the printing press, so his ideas didn't spread very quickly, right? Now, he spoke out against the immorality of the church, right? He advocated for we should be able to receive the bread and the wine at Mass. We should be able to, priests should be allowed to get married. The translation of the Bible into vernacular languages. Put a star next to this one, this one, this one, this one. These middle ones, okay? Abolishing purgatory is a big thing he said you should do. He also said you should eliminate simony. He even translated the Bible into Czech, and his followers were called Hussites. Wait a second. Yes, Jan Hus is the first successful Protestant reformer, all right? He created the first Protestant church. But problem is, they went into hiding, and they all kind of died out. The reason why they all died out and the reason why they didn't spread quickly is not because of the printing press, but because Jan Hus was summoned to a council known as the Council of Constance in 1415. And when this happened, he was told he would be fine and that he would not be harmed and that he would not be hurt. So he arrived at the Council of Constance in 415 expecting a debate. But when he got there, he was tried, arrested, and put on trial for heresy, and the Inquisition burned him at the stake. All right, so that is your last big reformer. That's what I'm leaving you with right there on the weekend. Don't say things like that and get burned at the stake. It's a really rough way to go out. But I hope y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all soon.